books. They say they are a comfort, a pleasure, a door to other worlds. But you and I, we know better. Welcome back to Have You Read This? A study of words and the peculiar afflictions they bring. Some books enlighten. Others fester in the mind like a sickness. Some whisper things you were never meant to hear. And yet we read them. We let them in. Why? Perhaps we are drawn to ruin. Or perhaps the books are reading us.
How about that intro, huh? That's right. So for the 12 of you out there that listen to this podcast, you already know that I change this opener on almost every episode, and maybe one of these days I'll just pick one so that everybody can kind of get used to it. But I don't know. I thought about encouraging listeners to chime in and tell me which opener they like best, but that's just too much work, and I don't really care enough about others' opinions to change what I'm doing. In case you're not one of the 12 people that listen on a regular basis and you're new here, one of my favorite things to do is hate a particular Facebook group, which is full of people posting about the same 10 books and asking the same 10 questions over and over and over again. And seeing that group on repeat, it reminds me of Marshawn Lynch at press conference, where he answers every question with, "I'm just here so I won't get fined." And literally the whole time he's there, that's all he says. That's what this group feels like to me. If you ever need a group where there's 98 posts about the same Frida McFadden book on a daily basis, then let me know, and maybe I'll share the name of it. A highlight recently in this group, maybe highlight's a loose term here, but a highlight in this group was there was a post where some lady shared a screenshot of her Spotify account. She's listening to audiobooks. She got this notification saying she was out of hours for audiobooks, and she took a screenshot of it and shared it and was like, "Does anybody know what this means? I still have time left of my book." And I like, yeah, it means you're out of hours. Like, if you read the notification, it literally says you're out of hours. And I worry about people sometimes. I could see this person sitting in the middle of the road on the highway in their car, wondering why it wouldn't start because it's out of gas. And maybe they take a picture of their dashboard with the fuel light on. You're out of hours, Sharon. Like, it literally says that on the screen. I guess enough complaining. Should probably talk about books, like, while we're here in the first place, and let's shift it. Maybe, I don't know, something more positive. Just recently, I won a Goodreads giveaway. So for anybody, I know there's a lot of people out there that ask, like, does this ever happen? Does anybody ever win these things? Yeah, it happens. I won 2 of them last year. And the book that I won last month, I think it would fall under self-help. And it kind of made me start thinking about what are the best self-help books that I've read, but I don't want to mention the ones that everybody else always talks about. And it's pretty easy to just toss Atomic Habits out there, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that have read that, and somebody will say, "Oh, you got to read Outliers." And there's like a lot of typical books that make the list, but I don't really want to talk about all of those. I want to talk about something different, but also ones that I think these are worth having on your bookshelf, and not just a virtual TBR in your Kindle library. I'm talking about a physical copy. I think each one of these that I'm going to talk about is great to have a physical copy and to take notes in and to annotate like the whole thing, load these suckers up with Post-it notes. And I think even reading them maybe annually as a refresher, but just read them more than once, because I think all of these have some really good reminders that are worth hearing on, I guess, a somewhat regular basis. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is the one that I received through the Goodreads giveaway, titled Undoing Urgency, Reclaim Your Time for the Things That Matter Most, by Ryan Matt Reynolds. And there's a lot of times where I'd like to admit that, like, okay, I get this book, and before I read it, there's a part of me that mentally discards it as this is just another regurgitated self-help pile of crap. Somebody that wants to put their own terminology on the same processes that other more successful people have already written about. I got to say, like, this one surprised me. And I mean in a good way. I'm not talking a surprise like Kanye West's wife being butt naked at an award show and wondering why they weren't allowed in. I'm talking about good surprises. So a large portion of this book is, I would say, devoted to deprioritizing your life. Reynolds' book speaks to, I would say, a methodology he labeled the game plan, and the word game is in all caps. And it basically stands for goals, actions, metrics, and execution. And I know what you're thinking. Well, you said it's not regurgitated, and that's what this is. It's, can you do something? Can you measure it? Can you repeat it? Can you evaluate it? But he also goes into things like, what are your core values? What is a core value in the first place? And how do these core values relate to your goals and ultimately the mark you want to leave upon the world? And by mark, I don't mean skid mark like Jake and Logan Paul. I think there's a great quote. There's a lot of quotes that actually stood out, and I have a Kindle copy of this. I think this would be something worth buying, and so that I'd probably highlight the crap out of this one. But there was a great quote that I pulled out, and I just want to share that one.
Anything not communicated or acted on when you leave this earth will not be what you are remembered for. Your core values are your eulogy, if you could write it yourself. So ask and answer the question, how do I want to be remembered?
I don't know. I just love that. How do you want to be remembered? I'm hoping that all of us at some point have asked that question. We might not have a great answer to it, but what legacy do you want to leave when you're gone? How do you want to be remembered and thought of? This book talks directly to that, but it helps move out distractions and wasted time so you can not just focus on the important things to you, but you can tackle these things head on. I think one of the things that I like so much about this, there's a lot of plain language used in this book. And I thought that was great because there's days where I feel like I'm on a third grade reading level. I can't always handle Thomas Ligotti. I need something more layman's terms where I don't have to look up every other word. And I'm definitely not implying that Reynolds wrote a dumb book. I'm just saying he wrote it where any audience can take this information in and immediately utilize it. He just doesn't need to be extremely fancy with it. He breaks down this process in a very common sense approach. And I just think that anybody that really digs into this can follow it. And I also think that they would see vast improvements from this plan that he talks about. The second book I want to mention is Tough: Building True Mental, Physical, and Emotional Toughness for Success and Fulfillment by Greg Everett. And I don't know, just thinking about this now, when you write one of these self-help books, do you have to come up with like a title, and then does the publisher say, hey, that's really good, we need 50 words and a subtitle? I don't know. But it seems like there's a lot of these that are like that. But, I guess if you just say the book is called Tough, what the heck does that even mean? So maybe you have to clarify it with some additional language. Anyway, anybody in the vicinity of the weightlifting community should immediately recognize the Everett name. And if you are a weightlifter and you don't know the name, then you're not actually a weightlifter. I have long been a fan of Greg's work, the content that he puts out, the coaching. At one point, I think I had a subscription to Catalyst Athletics, the programming that he used, and I loved every bit of it. It was really, really smart. But there's one thing that I also like about the information that Greg's put out, and he has a blunt delivery. And to some, I could see, okay, well, this comes across rude, but I don't think it's rude. To me, it's his way of delivering factual information efficiently. And for those out there worried about a book called Tough, about me promoting toxic masculinity because of this book, written by a world-renowned weightlifting coach, you can slowly remove your bunched up underwear from your crack. The synopsis, in part, I should say, reads, "This is not a chest pounding call for manly activity, emotional sterility, and self flagellation, but a guide to discover and develop our ultimate capacity to withstand adversity, to collect and build the mental and physical tools to accomplish the challenging and incredible, to find security in our identities and the confidence and resilience it engenders, and to become an active and positive contributor to the world at large." Greg's a smart guy. Despite some of the reviews, there's a reviewer that said this book contains 2,000 useful words and the rest are a high school essay. And I don't know, that person seems like the kind that would buy Haktua's meme coin. I don't know. Greg has a lot of valid points, and I really don't see his book getting covered on a lot of these lists. I don't know. Maybe I don't read a lot of these lists, but the ones that I found, it's just kind of like that group where they only share the same authors. It's just, oh, I need to make this list. I'm going to go put the typical subjects on there. I just don't think this book gets covered enough. Greg has a lot of great things to say that you can apply.
We don't have the power to choose all of our experiences, but we always have the ability to choose our behavior in the midst of them and in their wake. And those choices are what define our character.
That quote stands out to me for many reasons, because if you take it in the context of this episode and you start off with undoing urgency and creating a game plan, Tough dives into our choices. It dives also into our character. Not that the other ones don't, but Tough really does that. And this is all tied together and relevant. And I have to say, to this day, I still have a copy of Tough on my bookshelf and zero plans to get rid of it. Next on my list is You're Not Listening, What You're Missing and Why It Matters by Kate Murphy. The basic gist of this book is that our world is now full of technology. Big shocker, right? Like, we don't need a book to tell us that. You can read The Anxious Generation and figure out why that technology isn't so great. And I probably should have put that one on the list too. But anyway, our world is now full of technology, and it has allowed us to instantly connect with anyone and everyone at any time we want. Even with all of this new ability to connect, there's a lot of times where it feels like nobody's listening. We're all online and we're all communicating. However, we're all lonely and we all feel more isolated. And there's a lot of times where we are also not as tolerant of each other as we used to be. And there's a section of this book that I would say caught me off guard. Maybe not a section, but a question. And Murphy asks something along the lines of, who's listening? And you got to think about some of these conversations you have with people in your circle. Do they truly listen to what you're saying? Or would you say that they're just paying attention long enough so they can chime in with their own thoughts or their own opinions? But what about the technology? Because if you're talking to someone and they pull out their phone, do you feel like they're listening to you? I believe this book even mentions a study where the presence of a phone, like just having it out on the table, and it's not even being used, that makes others feel if they're not being listened to. So imagine you go out to eat with somebody, it's just you and them, and then all of a sudden they put their phone on the table next to their plate, and it's just like right there. And you can see the notifications. Is that not distracting? Do you feel like that person is actually paying attention to what you're saying? Or are you getting a portion of their attention? I took a lot away from this one, just kind of like everything on this list. And I've had moments where I am talking with someone and I feel like I'm only there halfway mentally because my mind's on my phone, the texts I've got to answer, the email I need to send. And there's been a lot of times where this book has helped me catch myself right in those situations and do something about it. Like I'll say, hey, look, I'm sorry, but can you repeat that? I was too distracted. I was on my phone. And then I'll put my phone in my pocket or put it down or whatever, put it on Do Not Disturb. It's like, hey, look, I'm sorry. You've got my full attention now. Let's start that over. And I mean, of course, hopefully that should lead to putting your phone down in the first place when someone's trying to have a conversation with you. But this was a lot of this stuff in her book was an eye opener about listening and how you truly go about it so that you can take that information in, but also make other people aware that you are truly paying attention.
To listen does not mean, or even imply, that you agree with someone. It simply means you accept the legitimacy of the other person's point of view and that you might have something to learn from it. It also means that you embrace the possibility that there might be multiple truths, and understanding them all might lead to a larger truth. Good listeners know understanding is not binary.
Next up is a book written by Varg Freeborn. He wrote Violence of Mind in 2018. My guess would be that if Freeborn was standing on stage with the other authors mentioned in this episode, this guy would really stand out, possibly making viewers question, is this guy here by mistake? Like, this guy does not look like an author. I don't know what an author looks like. I just feel like this guy would probably stand out. At 19, he was convicted in a self-defense case that was said to have went terribly wrong, and he was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in a penitentiary for stabbing his attacker dozens of times. It's obviously since been released, and he's went on to train civilian and law enforcement, gunfighting and tactics, and he's provided training to civilians and law enforcement all over the U.S. So he's got quite the variety of training, but also a really unique experience having been incarcerated for 5 years. A lot of the tactics and books and things that I have read, they typically come from military or law enforcement. There's not a lot of them that I've read where somebody stabbed somebody and was imprisoned for it, and now they've talked about violence as a result of these things. There's a ton of takeaways here, but one that stands out reminds me of an incident that took place here close to home. And I got to say, there's part of me that doesn't want to share this. I guess there's I don't know, embarrassment. There's a little bit about it that I don't know. I just don't want to put it out there, but we live really, really close to our kids' school, and we're so close that the carpool line backs up around the corner on one of the roads over here, and parents frequently use our subdivision to cut through that carpool line and get to the school quicker. And one year it was so bad, there was times where I couldn't even back out of the driveway due to traffic. And you know, what's the school going to do? They can't say, hey, there's this public road, you can't use it. They did their best to encourage parents to avoid the subdivisions, because I think a lot of parents around this area were complaining. And I get it, but I also get wanting to cut through the carpool line. You know, if you've ever sat in a carpool line, it makes you violent. It's not a fun thing to always be in one of those. So anyway, we pull out of the driveway, and really after a couple houses, I come to a stop sign. And if I turn left, I can kind of see the school, and that's how close it is. School entrance is visible. It's literally right there. But I hate being at the stop sign because so many parents assume that we're just cutting through and they won't let you out. And I literally hate it. But I wish that the school would give us some kind of something to hang from the rearview mirror, some kind of colored card or something. And so if somebody saw that, but, oh, they live in that subdivision, that's the only way they got that card. So we don't have to be a colossal butthole to these people that are just, leaving their house. But one morning I rolled up to the sign and I heard what sounded like yelling. I had my windows up, girls were in the car, and I cracked my window to kind of figure, I was just nosy, right? Like, somebody's yelling, I wonder who they're yelling at. Couldn't figure it out. And then I realized that there was this lady in a minivan who had her window down and she was yelling. And again, I had no idea who she could be yelling at. I was confused. We're all stopped at I'm in the stop sign and the carpool line stopped. I had my window down all the way at that point, and I realized she was pointing and yelling at me. And I was like, I just literally just got to the stop sign. I haven't even had time to screw something up yet. Like, why are you mad? And usually I'm in more control, but that whole situation, when I realized she was yelling at me and probably what it was about, that just flipped some switch inside of me. And I opened the car door and I got out, and she was literally screaming at me, telling me, "You got to wait in the carpool line like everybody else. You can't cut," and blah, blah, blah. And I shouted back, and I turned around and I pointed, and I was like, "Lady, I literally live in that house, like right there. Like, you can see my house. I'm not going to drive 2 miles out of the way to sit in a carpool line when my house is literally right there." And as I started to walk towards her van, and I didn't have any plans to, punch this lady in the face, but I did walk closer to the van. Now there's still a road in between us, so y'all don't freak out. But she quickly stopped yelling and she rolled her window up. And this stop sign's it's also a bus stop. And what's sad was, like, one of the parents waiting there with their kid was like, hey man, don't get too upset. She literally does that every single morning. And I thought, you are a miserable heifer. But Freeborn's book talks about violence, when to use it, when to harness it, but also when to expect it. People often act emotionally in situations without consideration for the potential of violence. And when you open a door, you have to be prepared for anything that will walk through that door. And naturally, both my girls were mortified that I got out of the car. And, of course, I had to man up and apologize to them. Like, hey, that's not how we do things. I should have just let her go be a nutcase on down the road. And I remember my oldest daughter, I can't remember her exact words, but she said something like, "Dad, that lady was 120 pounds and she was terrified when you got out of the car." Now, my natural reaction was like, well, she opened that door when she started yelling. She needs to be prepared for whatever was going to walk through that door that she opened, even if that was violence. And I tried to use these elements from this book to prepare her. Like, you can't just throw your hands up to somebody in traffic. When you do that, you're opening a door. So don't be surprised if something violent comes through it. Like, are you prepared for that? But on the flip side, I too needed to be prepared. I mean, nowadays, you just have no idea what's on the other side. You have no idea what's going through somebody's mind. And I was not prepared for her to take violent action. Thankfully, nothing violent took place that morning, but it could have. What if I was not more in control of my emotions? What if she was so frightened she used deadly force? There were so many scenarios that never even crossed my mind. I was just so irritated I've been at this stop sign so many times. I live right there. You people are nutcases. And it's these situations and more that are covered in this book by Freeborn, but it's done so in a really unique and powerful fashion that I've not gotten from other books that fall under this genre. And I think at the end of the day, it's just there's a lot of, I need to consider the situation at hand and what kind of actions I should take and what kind of actions should I be prepared for. There's a great line from his book, which goes like this.
Not every situation is a nail just because you have a hammer.
So Freeborn touches on things like criminal violence, self-defense, lethal force, mindset, firearms training, concealment from point of view that many will never have. And even if it's not your area of expertise, or maybe it's your job, maybe you're like, I'm not military, law enforcement, whatever, I still think this is a worthwhile read. The bluntness of the language, and it's something that could affect you at some point. And these things help us be more prepared. Finally, I know you're like, thank God, I thought we'd never get to the end. I want to mention This Is Water by David Foster Wallace. And if you're familiar with this one, you might be asking, hey, why are you including this? This isn't really even a book. And to that, I would say you're right. But I would also tell you to shut up, because this is my podcast. Do what I want. This Is Water is actually a commencement speech given to the graduating class at Kenyon College in 2005. This one was recommended to me, and I was happy when I opened up the link. I was expecting like Amazon or something like that, but it wasn't only the transcript of the speech that Wallace gave, but there's also a recording on it of him delivering the speech. And there was a whole lot that he packed into this. It's not super long. I want to say it's like 20 minutes, give or take. But my big takeaway here was our default setting when viewing any situation and the ability to critically think through it, removing ourselves as the center of the universe. For example, sure, I could have assumed that mom in the carpool line was some insane idiot who couldn't control herself or her emotions. Or what if I paused and thought about her and her situation? What actually brought her to that point? I think there's an example used in this speech by Wallace where we look at a lady driving a giant SUV. It's like, oh, this is a gas guzzler and she hates the environment. And it would be easy to assume that she walked into the dealership and said, hey, I need a car so big that I can barely park it or drive it. Hey, I also need something that is going to destroy me financially anytime I need to fill it up. But he talks about thinking about things from the different perspective and critically thinking through these scenarios. What if this person had an accident? She could have had a terrible, terrible accident that she barely survived, and she's terrified of driving. Now that SUV might be the only thing that she feels safe driving. And it's the only thing that's allowed her to get on the road again and drive her family where they need to drive. So there's a lot going on than what my initial assumptions could be. I think he talks to that, like, is your default setting just to assume that something is negative?
The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline, and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty, unsexy ways every day. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing.
And I'll link the audio of him speaking on my website, haveyourreadthispodcast.com. Okay, the good news is I don't have a fancy outro for this one. So I'll just say go find me on Instagram and YouTube and subscribe. And I thought about saying smash that like button, but people that say that need to take a nap in traffic. Until next time.